Alabama Moon, Chapter 34, page 195. A couple of days later, Hal and I took the truck to get my things at the old shelter. Mr. Mitchell told us to drive into Union and head south to get to Gainesville. We'd pass through town and then I'd start recognizing things. "Your daddy doesn't mind you taking his truck out here by yourself?" "I'm going to Hellenweiler just as fast as I get caught driving as walking." "You're not going to get caught. That's what you always say, and you've been caught at least once." "They can't keep me, though." Hal laughed. "We got laundry to do, too." "Where are we going to do that?" "The laundromat." "I've never been to a laundromat." "You ain't never been lots of places." "That's the place you told me they have a phone." "Yeah, and they got good-looking girls." "I don't care about girls. I want to use that phone." "We're going to call him soon. He hasn't been there that long." "But they said he was okay, right?" "Yeah, I told you that already. He's okay." "Good." I could tell we were getting close to where I used to live by the smell of the forest and the types of trees I was seeing. "We're almost there," I said. "You recognize all this?" "Yeah." It wasn't long before we came to the bridge over the Noxubee River. "Stop right here," I said. Hal pulled over and stared at me. I got out and scooted on the rear down to the hill to the swamp. When I got to the bottom, I heard Hal yell at me from above. "What you want an old wheelbarrow for?" Hal asked. "It's mine. Sanders threw it down here." "That the one you been talking about?" "Yeah, the one I hauled my pap around in." "Jesus, you need some help?" "No, I've got it. It's just jabbed down in this mud pretty good." I finally managed to get the wheelbarrow out of the mud and drag it back up to the truck. Hal helped me put it back in the bed, and then we set out again. A few miles down the road, I told him to pull over once more. "This is it," I said. "You wait here, and I'll be back in a little while." "There ain't nothing here." "I've got trails out there that I can take to the shelter." "All right. How long's a little while to you?" I shrugged my shoulders. "That's what I figured. How about I go to the laundromat and come back?" "All right," I said. "You can find me later." I bent over, picked up a stick, and jabbed it into the ground. "Right here." My feet fell quickly on the old footpaths like I had just left the day before. I pictured what lay before me all the way to the shelter. Every crook in the path, low branch, rise and fall, gurgling creek. The patterns and sounds of the patch of the forest where I had lived for so long came back to me. I had run the trail so many times that I knew how firm the ground was before every step. I knew enough I knew enough about what lived in the bushes and trees around me to tell the time of day by their movements and sounds. After an hour and a half, I was close to the shelter, yet I had the feeling that something was wrong. Somehow things were different, but I didn't know how. I slowed to a trot, and finally I took off my shoes and walked on the outsides of my feet. I approached the clearing, and suddenly I knew that it was the forest noises. They weren't right. A disturbance has passed through and left silence behind it. Scattered about the clearing were tools and a few items of furniture Pap and I had in the shelter. The curing barrel was knocked over. Parts of the roof were pulled away. I walked slowly into the shelter and found it unusually bright inside from the sunlight that beamed through the holes in the roof. The hide pile was thrown about the floor, or about the room, and a jar of nails lay shattered and spilled where the cupboard had been. Pap's books were in a soggy pile on the floor. I wasn't sure what I was feeling. I wasn't mad. I wasn't unhappy. I was confused. Remembering what I had come for, I felt around in the ceiling supports, and my hand touched Pap's rifle. I pulled it from its hiding place and looked over it. It was in good shape, except for a little rust on the barrel. I found our tube of grease on the floor and squeezed some under the rag. I gave the rifle a rub-down and then stepped back out of the shelter. "Wasn't anything I could have done about this, Pap," I said loud. "I guess I'm not supposed to be here anyway. Supposed to be in Alaska by now." All I wanted was the rifle. I turned my back to the shelter and stepped into the forest once more. This time, I took a path down through a cane thicket and across a stream where I used to run traps. I crossed a rusty barbed wire fence that Pap once said looked like 100 years old by the way it was grown into the sides of the trees. I moved quickly through the hills and valleys and across Mr. Wellington's dirt road and back into the forest. After a while, I heard cars on the blacktop. I came out of the trees and continued the half-mile to Mr. Abrascado's store. I saw him through the window that looked over the gas pumps. His back was to me, and I knew that he was watching the television above the tobacco shelf. He didn't turn when I walked in, and the little bell jingled on the door. I stood there watching him and feeling nervous about how he would act. My hands were tired of holding the rifle, so I set the butt of it on the floor and held it at the end of the barrel. "Hey," I said. He turned and glanced at me briefly, then looked at me again and stood up. "Moon?" I nodded at him. "That you?" "Yes, sir." He leaned over the counter and stared at me like he couldn't see me very well. "Hardly recognize you without your hair." I rubbed my head and nodded. Mr. Abrascado looked like he didn't know what to do. "Why don't you put up that gun?" he said. "You might take it from me." "Why are you standing there holding it like that?" "'Cause I was carrying it." "Have you got it loaded?" "It's always loaded." "I'm not comfortable with you standing there with a loaded rifle in my store." "You think I'm going to shoot you?" "No, you're not." "Are you?" "I've never shot anybody. I wouldn't shoot you, Mr. Abrascado." He walked around the counter and came to stand before me. He was still watching me in a way that made me nervous. Set it over there by the door anyway." I glanced behind me, careful to keep him in sight, and saw a place near the door where I could lean the rifle and still be able to grab it quickly if I had to run out. I leaned it against the wall and faced Mr. Abrascado again. I wanted to ask about my Pap. "You know how many people are looking for you?" "I know Sanders is after me." Mr. Abrascado nodded. "He's in here at least twice a week asking if I seen you. I think he tore up our old shelter. I just came from there." "I'd hate to think what he's going to do when he gets his hands on you. You shouldn't mess with people like him. Maybe he won't catch me. After everything he says you did to him, he's going to give it all he's got. You know, you could get me in trouble being here. I don't need any of his kind of trouble. That's why I'm standing by this door. You tried to turn me in once already." Mr. Abrascado shook his head and stepped behind the counter. "So you want to know about your father, do you? That's right. Why he bring me out here?" He turned and looked at me and leaned against the tobacco shelf. "Okay, why don't you sit down and I'll tell you what I know." I slipped down the wall to the floor. "Moon, I didn't meet your father until you were about 2 years old. He just moved out into the forest and he had you and your mother, Caroline, with him. They carried you around in a burlap sack with a piece of hemp rope, some kind of papoose set up. Neither one of them talked much. They'd tell me what they wanted, trade a few things, and be gone. With me in a sack?" "That's right. Nobody knew where y'all went out there in that forest. You'd think after knowing your father all those years I'd have some idea where it was you lived, but he was careful to cover his tracks, and I don't make a habit of getting in another man's business." Mr. Abrascado reached down and took a sip of cola that was on the counter. "Anyhow, your father and I talked once after your mother died. He came in here with you one late afternoon as I was closing, sat down on the floor just like you're doing now. He told me that she was dead, that he buried her in the woods. I asked him if there was anything I could do, and he just shook his head. He was quiet for a long time. You never could tell what he wanted. That was the only time I thought maybe he was going to tell me something about himself. Finally, he asked me if I've ever been in war, and I said no. He said, once you've been in a war, you don't need much to live. I took that to mean he'd gone to Vietnam, and something that happened to him over there made him want to live like he did." "What happened in Vietnam?" "What happens in most wars. People get killed. However, a lot of people didn't think we should have been over there. They made Pap go, and he didn't want to? Something like that. Is Sanders mad at Pap about Vietnam?" "No, I don't think so." "Why won't he leave me alone?" "You're starting to learn that life's not as simple as you thought it was, Moon. There's mean people out there. Sanders just has a bad streak in him. I told him a bunch of times I wasn't scared of him, and he's still after me. I know you're not scared of him. You're not scared of anything. You're screwed up, Moon. You're all messed up. You have no sense of reality. You've got to get some help. I stood and grabbed my rifle. Mr. Abrascato ducked behind the counter. Hey now, he yelled. I stood there with my rifle in my hands, watching the counter. Moon, he called out. What? What are you doing? Leaving. Mr. Abrascato peered slowly over the counter. I can tell you're not my friend, I said. I am your friend, Moon. I just know you need help, and I'm trying to talk some sense into your hard little head. You don't know anything about me, and I know you longer than anybody except my pap. You know I wouldn't shoot at you. Mr. Abrascato shook his head. I'm sorry, he said. It's just that the news... I turned and left. I sat inside the edge of the forest for about 15 minutes before Hal pulled up near the stake I used as a marker. I stood and walked to the road holding Pap's rifle. Hal watched me out of the truck window. What kind is it? It's a .22. That's all you wanted? I climbed into the truck and put the rifle between my legs. No, you'd best smash that gas pedal. What'd you do now? I went to that store, Mr. Abrascato, likely to have Sanders around here looking for me. Crap, Hal said. He slammed down on the gas pedal and the tires threw dirt until they caught the asphalt and squalled. I wanted to ask him about Pap. I should have seen that coming. He said Vietnam made him want to live close to the forest. You happy now? No. What happened in Vietnam? I don't know. Ask Daddy. I will. You know what else? What? Someone's been to my old shelter and tore it up. You mad about that? I shook my head. I don't care now. Nothing else there I needed. Hal turned the truck around, and we headed back towards Union. He kept looking in the rearview mirror for a while, then relaxed. You hungry? He asked me. Yeah, you? We'll stop up here at the Lock and Dam. I got some Vienna sausages and crackers. You okay? Yeah. Hal looked at me sideways. All right. We stopped at a point along the river where we could see the lock and sat on the tailgate. I pulled a sausage from the can and put it between 2 crackers and took a bite. Pretty good sausage, I said with a mouthful. Yeah, they're pretty good. What you want to do this afternoon? You know what I want to do. All right. We'll go call 'em. I swear, I ain't taking you to visit everybody in the whole daggone state.